All right, I'm going to go on mute.
Shelly, you may begin.
Hello and welcome to session 2 of SharePoint Week. We're excited that you guys have all joined us today. Today we are going to be talking about SharePoint and Teams and how they work better together. My name is Shelly Avery and I'll be your host. We have Mark Kashman joining us today. He is our Senior Product Manager. And then Mike Gannotti will be our host today. And let's go ahead and get started. So a couple of housekeeping things before we have Mark take us away, but we just want to let you know that this event is brought to you by Microsoft Health and Life Sciences Group. And we do have a blog where we post all of the updates for sessions like this and other great articles of information. So we hope that you guys will follow us there and comment and like things as you feel appropriate. And then for today's session, just some housekeeping items. We really encourage you to ask questions. We want this to be interactive and we want this to be of value to you. All of our questions are moderated, so Mike and I will be in the background moderating the questions, and so if there are similar questions, we can help pose those to Mark so we can make sure that he gets all of your questions answered. And we'd love to know who you are and where you're viewing from, so definitely send us a shout out in the Q&A. And then at the conclusion of the session, we will make sure to post the recording up on the blog. So if you have to leave early or you want to share this with some of your other colleagues, please go to the blog to be able to share that out. So now how to do Q&A. So up in the right-hand corner of your screen, there will be a little kind of question mark with a chat window. If you click on that, you will be able to enter into the Q&A. And so you can post your name. That is optional, but we do encourage it, and then post your question there. And so we'll have that moderated Q&A right there on this side. So with that, we are going to go on to the presentation. So Mark, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will get the desktop coming up here, and Mike or Shelly, if you can just validate that everything's coming through. I'm going to minimize this, but that you can see the screen, and we'll get started.
Yep, you are full screen and running great.
Excellent. So thank you for taking time today to come learn about what role SharePoint plays in Microsoft Teams, or if you can think about what role Microsoft Teams does to help you distribute and communicate and collaborate when it comes to content. So there's a lot that both products offer, and we're really looking and focusing on that content collaboration. When you've got assets and information that you're building and sharing and working on for different projects, campaigns, or certainly do the life cycle of a drug, whatever the case might be, there's a lot that can help how you work together. And this is really to showcase a lot of how these products are integrated, but really more to step back and really showcase the scenarios that you can do when you bring these technologies together. My name is Mark Kashman. I'm a Senior Product Manager on the SharePoint team, and a lot of what I focus on is how SharePoint, from a content services perspective, is able to support a lot of different applications throughout Office 365. And certainly today's topic is how is that within Microsoft Teams. And the fun metadata point of today is we're actually using Microsoft Teams to broadcast, and we'll be doing demos inside of Microsoft Teams, which actually starts with the PowerPoint in Microsoft Teams. And I'll get to that in just a second. But if you think in terms of the overall umbrella of how do you get this technology, we're going to spend a little time on just grounding sort of the what is it, but then really getting into showing you a bunch of stuff. But Microsoft 365 incorporates a lot. It includes all of Office 365. It includes Windows 10 and, of course, the management and getting to Windows 10 aspect. and then there's the enterprise mobility and security. And wrapped with all of this is a lot of ability, a lot of content creation capabilities with Office, with video, with other tools that we have for the different files and content that you're creating. A lot of what we focus on today will be in this sphere of it's built for work, it's built for teamwork, and it helps bring all of your team members, people who maybe are owners, people who are just members, maybe even people who are passive viewers, and even guests if you're inviting people who are outside of your company to come in and work on your behalf, to create and contribute. And then when they no longer need to be there, of course, you can manage all of that. Everything is integrated, and not only is it integrated, but we're really building out consistent experiences across these different technologies. And I'll highlight a few points where when you're working in SharePoint, or if you're working in Microsoft Teams, or even Outlook or OneDrive, we're really building a lot of consistent experiences. And in fact, it's the same controls. Of course, it's more importantly, it's the same access to the content that you have without having versions of or headaches of how you get there. And when we talk about security, there's a lot of things that we do for you proactively to protect your content. We're highly certified in our data centers. We have highly trained security experts doing a number of different things to build the technology, to monitor the environment, but we also give you all the additional tools to do things very proactively on your side, where you can use things like data loss prevention or IRM, or some of the higher end capabilities with the advanced threat protection. There's a lot that we offer from a security perspective, and we really want to ground that everything you can do in the early phases of every project, which is probably the most important information not to get exposed in the wrong ways, is of course as secure as we can by design with extra measures that you can take. So wrap this all together, where it leads us is to then think of, well, how do people work together these days? Primarily, you've got your own individual tasks that you're doing, both for work and life. We know there's a blend always of the dual user, and Microsoft really supports you being able to get your work done, but also get back to life. So we think of this in terms of a couple of loops. There's your inner loop, people that you're working with on a day-to-day, people that you will ask whether a campaign should do X or Y, and then make those decisions and have debates, and you certainly have draft materials. When you get to that moment where you're going to switch over and start to communicate all of the final changes that you've made, all the final thoughts on the right colors, the right photography, obviously the right results that you want to present in terms of the final materials. And that's when you go to your outer loop and start to communicate more broadly. Always at the center of how we design and build these tools to work together, from a content service perspective, that is SharePoint. And if you're leveraging video, that is also Microsoft Stream. And SharePoint and Stream provide the content in how you want to share and collaborate with others in the inner loop, and how you want to broadcast to everybody in the company or to specific regions and roles in how you decide that. And that is leveraging how you build out your sites and portals, how you engage with your audience via Yammer and social. But we see these as distinct parts of your world, your day-to-day, and it certainly might be a mix of these throughout the day in terms of leveraging Teams for meetings, sharing content, early drafts, to then turn to standing up your broader communication portal to be able to share that information across your intranet. Certainly there is always email, and within email we even want to promote that there are new ways of sharing attachments, so that it is a link to the document that is in place and is the one that's active and shared with everybody that needs to have access, but it isn't a copy of that document that would be in another repository, which is, of course, is kind of the old style of email attachments. So SharePoint has its hooks in providing content and services throughout your intranet, and hope this helps describe when you might leverage Teams, which we'll talk about today, and when you might leverage Yammer and other technologies for certain other use cases. So 2 more slides and then we'll get on to demo. From a SharePoint perspective, primarily we're talking today around SharePoint Sites and how they're connected to Microsoft Teams and the umbrella of how people are permissioned to be able to access the different apps as they move from one to the other, or as content shows up in one or the other, so that that consistent access and being able to get to your content and share it effectively is consistent. But beyond teamwork, certainly there's a lot of what we talked about for the broader outer loop. And there's also a business solutions component, which can play into if you're building a solution that's for your team and you want that experience to be inside of Microsoft Teams, you can easily do that to build your solution with Power Apps and Flow, build that as a nice page, or think of it as a mini dashboard in SharePoint, and then have that be a page that appears as a tab in Teams. And you'll hear me say that a couple of times as this is a tab in Teams, this is a tab in Teams, because that's really all it is. It's a window into your content, but the content remains secure and stored in SharePoint. And finally, there's a big component to building your own solutions. We call this the SharePoint framework. And a lot of times this comes into broader solutions for larger portions of your organization, but it can come into play if you have the specific need to build out a custom web part or a custom extension to the page, or you want a little bit more control of the look and feel of your pages. You can do that, and certainly they will show up as beautiful as you want and as functional as you want inside of Microsoft Teams. So when you bring them into Microsoft Teams, like I've brought this PowerPoint into Microsoft Teams, it's a place where not only can I showcase information, but I can then further communicate. There's a big chat component, and I'll show you a couple of times what the chat looks like when it's side-by-side content that's actually coming from somewhere else. But it's a big part of how you communicate one-on-one, one-to-many, one-to-few, or like today, one to the external world, using the Teams broadcast capabilities. So there's a large communications component and certainly centered around chat when it comes to people working together. When it comes to collaboration, obviously that's front and center. A lot of what I'll show you, a lot of that is how you work and share with your information. That might be documents, that might be SharePoint pages and news, it might be a planner board. There, of course, is a lot of other content beyond Microsoft 365. So there's a lot of connectors to be able to bring in information that you're leveraging on third-party tools. They also have a nice customization and extension model that actually is starting to map and mirror what we're doing in SharePoint. So one proof point here that's now in developers' hands, it's not yet in end users' hands, but it's coming soon, is if I have built a custom web part or I want to bring a web part from SharePoint as a tab in Teams, I can do that. So it's like a mini solution built in a way that was built for SharePoint. I can bring that into Teams, and vice versa. I can bring in what looks like as a tab or a connector in Teams. I can bring that as a full page app in SharePoint. So really, from a developer's perspective, you think of this as having two places where your code can run. And for end users, obviously a greater choice of if there is a custom solution that's been built for their company or their team, they can easily bring it where they need to and have it be a good experience. But again, not at the result of a developer having to develop it twice. But we definitely want you to work with confidence because Microsoft Teams is primarily a window into a lot of content that's stored in the right location based on a lot of what I mentioned earlier around security. Bringing it into SharePoint, bringing that content into Teams doesn't change any of that. It maintains the highest level of security, inclusive of the security of the chat itself, so that we don't break any SLAs and we only sustain what we have as the promise of how we secure your data, that you can certainly review to an nth degree if ever you want to know how is my data stored and who has access to it. So I'm going to break out of the PowerPoint here, and you'll see that this whole time in PowerPoint, I was actually in a Microsoft Teams environment. I'm full screen right now, so you don't see the top bar, but I'm in a web browser, and I'm accessing Microsoft Teams. And just to show you kind of where I'm at, I'm actually in Microsoft Teams that, of course, is a part of Office 365. And you see I have access to all of my other applications. We'll go to SharePoint in just a second. But you can see SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, Outlook. I can navigate to all those applications, and certainly a lot of that experience is consistent throughout Office 365. So I'm now in a team that's called Contoso Sourcing Europe. And this team, of course, by default has two tabs, Conversations and Files. First, in the files conversation experience, like I was showing you, this is that PowerPoint that I clicked into and went full screen so that you could see the PowerPoint. And obviously, from a collaborative perspective, if somebody had sent me a chat, they could @mention me. They could, of course, do things that are fun like this. It's SharePoint week, woo! So there's a lot of things that you can do in the chat component. There's certainly a lot of things that you can go and learn of how you can chat best, how you can reply, the things that you can do that are fun like this. I'm going to focus mostly on the SharePoint side and what you can bring in from SharePoint, but know that it's very easy to take a file like this one that's stored in SharePoint and really visualize it through Microsoft Teams in the context of calling it to attention via a chat. Or if you go into the default files tab, you should know that this files experience is powered by SharePoint. And this is the same document library that got created when we created this original team. So when you create a team, or today, when you create a SharePoint site, depending on where you start from, you actually are creating a number of applications for the group of people that you list out. And that's a set of owners and a set of members. And if you have any questions around how we do that, we can certainly address those. But essentially what you're doing is you're creating a new Office 365 group in Azure AD. And all of those people that you list, those members and owners, have the same access to the content. And of course, you're then accessing the content through a number of applications that gets provisioned for that group of people. So I'm in the application of Teams that was provisioned this team for this Contoso Europe group. So this is their set of files, and to be very clear, the way that we map from Teams to SharePoint is for every channel. So I'm on the general channel, which again is the default experience when I create a team. This group is actually a group folder called, a folder in SharePoint that's called General. And I'll show you a second what that looks like in the SharePoint side. But it's a default tab. It's called Files, and it is the default folder for this general channel. You can see we've got a number of different channels, and each time we create a new channel, it'll create a new folder in SharePoint that's then specific to that channel. So in the general channel, you can see that I'm pulling in full fidelity the SharePoint document library, and you can see that I have access to my content. If I click on one, the context will change of what I can do up here, where I can maybe just grab a link because I want to put it in a chat. I can move it, I can copy it. I can do all the things that I can do in a SharePoint document library because it is the same control. We call this the new files experience inside of Teams. But you can see I also am doing things with column formatting, which is true for document libraries and SharePoint lists. And you can see that I've done this even to the extent if I wanted to show you how I did this. You can see that I have access to filter, I can group, I can change the ascending, descending, and I can treat this like a real document library. You can see that I've got some assets that are pinned here to the top. And if I check one and I want to unpin it, you'll see that the context changes. I can edit the pin, unpin, and then that will go away. So I have real access to the content, and not only do I have visibility into it, but like you saw me show you that PowerPoint, I can actually click into it, edit it, do everything that I want, and stay within the context of Teams without moving the context or switching my visual context of what application I'm in. One of the big things that we've brought is now the ability to sync directly from Microsoft Teams. So remember, it's just a document library in SharePoint. This is a window into this content, not a copy of it. And if I wanted to click sync, I could, and I'm going to tab over and show you that I've already done that in this library. So hopefully you can see with, if I don't overlay it too much, I am now looking at my C drive, which is on my Windows 10 desktop. And there's a number of things that I use the OneDrive Sync client to do. And now OneDrive Sync supports doing it directly from Microsoft Teams. So here's that Contoso Sourcing Europe folder, General. And you can see all the content, including the PowerPoint that I was starting with. And all of the content, even though it's visualized here in a more graphic way, is synced locally to my machine so that I can view the content. But one thing that's important about OneDrive, and it's true for how it syncs from Microsoft Teams, is when you see a little blue cloud, that means the file's available to me, but it's not yet taking up any disk drive, any disk space. And to further emphasize that, I'm going to bring up one other thing. So you can see here, this is if I go into the settings for OneDrive. This is all the cloud storage that I'm using, 650 megabytes. But if you see here, I haven't actually brought down any file except for one time with the PowerPoint, but now I've put it back. And you can see that it's taking up no space on disk. Here's that same Contoso Sourcing Europe general folder that I've chosen to sync, and I can remove and stop syncing at any time. And you see here, it's not taking up any space. That means because they're just cloud files until I need it. So if I want to work offline with the content that maybe I only experience through Teams, I can now do that and take my content with me offline. And of course, you can do that with your OneDrive, with your SharePoint sites, and of course, because this is backed by that same document library, you can do that. One final thing just to show you the new files experience is if I go into a more visual component, you'll see that we actually go in and you can see that we can view the files right here within Teams, and we can actually visualize a lot of different file types. And you'll see that this is an Adobe Illustrator file that allows me to go in and actually get a really rich preview of this file. So that's files experience coming through. I'll show you one more that's just kind of fun. So you can see this rich files experience that we have that's powered by SharePoint. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose one that will take just a little bit to load. So I'll warn those that are going to be staring as this loads. Oh, sorry, this is in a different area. I'll show you a PDF so I can show you clicking through what that looks like, so that we support, again, a rich experience to go into different types of content. So if you had anything that was a scanned image, a DICON image, we know that those are common in the health space. Anything that would be that you're using. If you notice, I'm in a very large PDF with multiple pages that I'm now clicking through. It's stored in the right place. I could easily start a conversation around this particular file, which will bring up the chat. And this will be one thing that I show you a couple of times. So if I wanted to go in here and mention Isaiah, I can do that. And it'll start a chat off of this asset that's stored in SharePoint, but in the context of us collaborating on something that we wanted to share about this particular file. So I'm going to close out and we'll move beyond files. And I'm going to switch a little context here. We've been in Microsoft Teams. I want to show you where a lot of this content is actually coming from within SharePoint. So this is the little tricky part of me having to get out of full screen for a moment and go to our SharePoint site, and then I'm going to go back into full screen. So this is SharePoint. Obviously, to get to this team site, there's a number of different ways. I could get to here from Microsoft Teams, but I'm now over just showing you a different area, and it's kind of a fun little thing to note. A lot of the new icons are showing up in different spaces. So when you're in SharePoint and you go into your app launcher, you can actually now see the new icons. Here's the new icon for Teams, and here's the new icon for SharePoint. And you'll see these pervasive more and more as we start to roll out the experience. But those are just getting started, so that's kind of fun. But we're here in SharePoint world, and we're on the site that's associated to that Microsoft Teams team, and that is called Contoso Sourcing Europe. I'm going to hover over this hover card, and Shelly, I just wanted to pause here before I dive in beyond slides in the initial part of the demo to take maybe 2 or 3 questions if there were any that were coming through.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. We have a handful of questions, so teeing up the most important ones.
Sure.
We have actually a couple of people asking the same question around what would be a recommendation for deploying the Teams client or giving access to nurses at a nurse station from like a shared workstation. We mentioned that there's going to be a Teams week next month where we can dig into this a little bit deeper, but any just quick tips that you can offer for that shared environment for people to access Teams would be great.
Yeah, the main thing that we suggest when there's a shared machine is it's a full login and log out of Office 365. So if the nurses have a unique login, so they've got their username and password, there's a lot of things that you can do on the Windows machine to make this seamless as well. If it's a lot of people, there's certainly ways to approach it. If it's just a handful of people that are logging in and out often, there's ways you can make that a lot easier as well. So in conjunction with how you can log in and out of Windows, or if you want to keep a single login and have people context switch so that they log in as themselves and require logout, which I think is probably pretty important. Once you do that and you're logged into Office 365 as a new user, that nurse logged in as themselves would see their experience. And that's to be also designed on what access they have to the different content. If they've been given the ability to work with Teams, they would then in Teams, like you saw me in Teams, see only the teams that they have access to. And so they may have 3 or 4, one that's specific to all nurses, one that's specific to a certain ward or a certain focus of medicine. However they're associated, they might be a member of one, they may be just a member of, they might be a member of 10 or hundreds, if not. And navigating those as a unique experience, once they're logged in, they would see their notifications, they would see anything that people have @mentioned them directly, they'd be able to go in and access the teams and the content within if they wanted to review, or if that's where they stored and set up unique experiences to have things set already up as tabs if they wanted to review, you know, the daily chart that gives an access to the view of the day that would then refresh the next day and the next day without having to adjust that tab. There's a lot that they could do, but best practice would be on a shared machine, either signing in as a unique experience to Windows, or if it's easier and you set it up in a way that's secure by design in terms of who has access and when they log in, they are themselves without accessing other people's content. You can do that as well. And again, you're switching into a secure instance of a new browser instance. But beyond that, there's probably a lot of great documentation and we can drill in and provide a little bit better. But logging in as a unique user will give you a unique experience for what you have access to in Microsoft Teams.
Thank you, Mark. And hopefully that answered a couple of these end users' questions. Another one was, if you have time, or could it potentially be in your demo, showing us how to use the SharePoint frame part web parts that are built for SharePoint Online and how you add those into Teams. And if
Sure.
there are any additional steps that need to be done to do that.
The part that I can show you today, because I don't have access to an environment in terms of the developer side of bringing a single unique custom web part. But what I'll show you certainly is about the same, is if I wanted to bring in any web part, custom or not, and put that on a page, and I'll show you that working from SharePoint into Microsoft Teams. Specifically what they're asking, I know I won't be able to show 100%, but I can certainly point to you to a resource that has that, where we did show that with Vesa Joven, who showed that at the Ignite conference. So I'll be able to show it and put it into a little context when I do demo that, which I was planning to do, but not specifically directly that one.
Okay, thanks. So last question for right now, and then we will get to the rest of these questions throughout. There were 2 similar questions that were asked around calendar sharing. So currently they're using like a shared project calendar in SharePoint, but what would be your best recommendation to get a shared calendar visible into Teams?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, there's a number of things. You've got your own personal calendar when you're logged into Teams that when you click on the word calendar in Teams, it'll show you your calendar. From a shared calendar perspective, obviously within the group, you have a shared calendar. So if what the question is asking is, can I visualize the shared calendar that's a part of this team? So as you can see here, I'm hovering over. We are in the Teams instance just a second ago. There's an Outlook experience that we think of this as a shared inbox or a group alias that you can email, and of course review the email. There's a shared calendar, a shared OneNote. We're in SharePoint now, and there's a shared planner experience, so you could have a unique plan. All of these are assets that you can bring into Teams as a tab, or inside of SharePoint if you actually want to build a unique experience where you want to add a little bit more context, not just the calendar. You could add and using our group calendar web part, add that to a page, add a little text, maybe some images or whatever might make sense to have next to the calendar. Might be a list of people. It might be, if it's more of a public-based calendar, you could have your team calendar, but then you could have things that are coming from a public RSS feed or a Twitter account. Whatever makes sense to put things side by side. You can do that on a SharePoint page, and then that page would be something that you could bring in as a tab in Teams. And I'll show you that when we go back to Teams. So great questions. We'll certainly take another set of questions a little bit further, about 15 minutes from now, and then certainly at the end. But in SharePoint, I really just want to show you the kinds of things that you can build into SharePoint, and then we'll show you bringing those into Microsoft Teams. So again, this is the group card that's showing me all the apps that I have access to. If I'm sending email, I can see the different emails that have been sent. And if I go a little bit into a larger screen, this just gives me the ability to see the types of information that we're working on together. Email, files, I can review the members of everybody here. And of course, if I have access, I'm an owner, this is where you would go to manage members. We talked a little bit about members earlier. This is where you can go to add members, change their role, or to invite others. And if you've enabled external sharing, you could certainly do that by adding an external guest. So in SharePoint, we have, of course, the ability to create news, to create pages, to design a page like you see here. I'm on the home page of a team site, and I can see that people around me, a lot is just me because this is mainly a demo of one, but you can see we've got 8 members and everybody who's creating news. Once it's published, it would show up here. We've got quick links web part to highlight, the top things that we want to direct people to. It could just be a spreadsheet. It could be a way to provide feedback to this team if it was more public, or just a way to navigate to different specific assets, whether they're a part of the team site or not. You can quick link to anything. Of course, you got the ability to go into video. This is about an 18-minute video, and now we support things. And I'm going to pause this for a second, where you can do some really unique deep search experiences. So I know somewhere in this, there's a mention of the bonus and some of how that bonus policy is changing. So I can go in and click right into that video, right at that spot where they mention bonus. So you couldn't hear it, but I could. He was talking about a cash bonus that was awarded to the winners. And the reason I'm showing you this is I want to show you it once here and then again in the context of Teams, this whole page. But I've got a number of web parts that are set up here, everything that's happening in the site, access to the document library because of the document library web part. And then here at the bottom is using the Microsoft Stream channel web part, or the web part configured into a channel. But if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that we've got a number of assets, the Teams, a way to navigate back to Teams, to view all my documents. I'm going to click into Documents, and you'll see that this is the same document library that I was showing you in Teams. We've got now the pinned assets. Hopefully the one that I unpinned is no longer there once it refreshes. That will come through. Sorry, I'm at the parent level, my fault. If I go into the general folder, remember each channel creates a folder. Now we only see that we've got 2 pinned assets. And there's a couple things to note when you look at the document library that's connected to Teams from the SharePoint side of things. You'll see here that we try to give you the indication that this folder is connected to a channel in Microsoft Teams, and you can go directly there by clicking this button. You'll also see up here, if I was back at the parent level, anytime I selected a folder that was connected to Teams, I would see this and the banner. The reason why it's important is there are a lot of team sites that existed before we even launched Microsoft Teams. So we now have a mechanism to get you from a classic team site in SharePoint Online and then move that to be a group connected site that then gets connected to a Microsoft Teams instance. And that might sound a little bit like a mouthful, but if you wanted the most modern experience, but you're on a site that's been around for 2 or 3 years, you can bring that into the modern space by going in and connecting it to a new Office 365 group, and then adding a Microsoft Teams instance, which really puts you into the state that you're seeing here. So if I were to go back and click on a folder that was created before Microsoft Teams, of course, I wouldn't see any of this connection to Microsoft Teams, but we're trying to make a relevant visual component to those things that are connected. Again, if I wanted to sync from here, if I wanted to do anything in this document library, inclusive of adding new content, I could do this here, or I could do it in Microsoft Teams, even with things like using Microsoft Flow to do a number of different things to the content. The other thing that I wanted to show you is a list. So this is a SharePoint list, and it's a pretty simple one. I'll show you one that is going to get me a little bit in trouble with Mike Gannotti, I'm sure. But this is a pretty simple list. Obviously, it's one that's running in SharePoint, and you'll see me bring this into Microsoft Teams. But think of this as one of the lists. The other one is just I did a poll while I was traveling on the East Coast in Boston, Chicago, and New York, and I was trying to find what is the best pizza place. So I made a simple list with the ability to, of course, add more. But again, just make a note of this list, and we'll see this in Microsoft Teams. Last thing I'm going to do.
And I approve, by the way.
You approve? Well, you can tell me if there's anything missing when I get to the next part of the demo. So one last thing I'm going to do here from the SharePoint side, and I think it'll address 70% of one of the questions. And I'll do this pretty quickly because there's a lot of other tutorials. I'm going to go in and create a new news post. So what this will do is it'll create a new page in SharePoint with some extra special characteristics because it's news, and I'll explain what that means. So first of all, I want to grab an image, and I can do this from the internet, or I can do it from my hard drive, or I can do it from around from my company, even from images that are approved for my company. But just for fun today, I'm going to go in and I'm going to just type in medicine, and we'll see if there's an image in the Commons area that I can actually use for free. And we'll pick, how about this one? Looks kind of nice. On point, hopefully. And once it's set, I can move the focal point so we can get the RX. This also determines how it looks all across Office 365, including through the SharePoint mobile app, so that now this is the focal point, and you would see that even on a 4-inch screen. But I can name this, and I'll just say, and as you can see here, I can change the layout. I can change the coloring. If I wanted to put text above, I can do that. And you can see it badges it if you wanted to give it more distinct characteristics. And of course, if you are focused on accessibility, you can certainly put in a lot of information into your news post. So there was a question around web parts. So what I'm going to first do is make this a 2-column layout. I'm going to bring in one web part, one that's just out of the box. We call this the highlighted content web part. And I'll just do a real light configuration to make this a list so you can see all the assets. But I only want PowerPoint to come through. So of the documents that are in this site, I'm only going to view PowerPoints, and I'm only going to view them as a list. And of course, these are documents that people have access to also in Microsoft Teams. So I don't need to do anything specific to give permissions from this point. But if I wanted to go in, and I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see these are all the web parts that we offer out of the box, where you've got a lot of ways to bring in a lot of different content, both inside and outside of Office 365, and of course beyond this site in particular for what you have access to. But at the very bottom here, you'll see that we've got a couple of new web parts and a couple of that are custom. And so there's one web part for the group calendar that you asked about. There's another one that's connected to the planner plan, so I could program a nice planner experience on this page. But one of the custom ones we built was Instagram. And I won't click on this right now because I know, well, I'll click on it because why not? So this will load a feed that we programmed at the SharePoint conference. And it's just a really quick example of if there's an open API to information you want to bring in, of course you can build with the SharePoint framework a custom web part. So this is a custom web part that we built. We don't offer one directly for Instagram, but we do offer one for Twitter, and I'll just add that last one, and we'll have fun with our friend Mike. And we'll program Mike's Twitter feed because I know he's pretty active on Twitter. So Mike, remind me what your Twitter handle is. Is it just your last name?
It's yeah, Gannotti.
All right. So we'll see what Mike's talking about. Streaming live, SharePoint and Teams better together.
Talking about you, man.
I love it. So we'll put the Twitter handle so that you guys can follow Mike here and follow his crazy adventures when he's doing video, audio, and probably 3D and 360 degree all the time. So anyway, real simple ways to build out, use news to communicate obviously to your team about a trip report, about a new finding. You can also bring in news from the outside if you want to just bring in a link to a news article. What happens though when I click publish or post news is it's going to post it to this team site. And it's also going to start to push it out to the people that have access to this. So anybody on this site would see it come to their SharePoint home, which is a home for SharePoint. When you click on the SharePoint tile, you'll see news aggregated for you at the top. You would also see this news flow to you in your SharePoint mobile app. And of course, it's going to be very personalized news because it's news for you. And as we start to roll out things like organization news, you would see a blend of news coming at you with notifications or not if you want to turn those alerts off. And I'm overemphasizing this a little bit because I've created news and it's going to help me get back over to Microsoft Teams. But just keep in mind that document library, the lists that I showed you, the pages that we've been referencing here, in addition to this new news article that I just published. So let me switch back to Teams. And this is another spot where we can pause if we want, if there are any questions that are burning. And I'll go back into full mode now, back into Microsoft Teams. And again, it's the Teams team that's connected to that SharePoint site that we were just on. And in fact, if you hover over here, you can see Contoso Sourcing Europe, and you click the 3 ellipses, open in SharePoint would just take us to where we just were, the connected team site. So Shelly, any questions that I can answer? Maybe 1 or 2, and then we'll keep moving on. Sure.
We have lots of great questions going on. I am trying to answer as many of them as possible and tee up some for you. So there were a couple questions around the difference between document management in SharePoint versus in Teams. One specific question was, is there any way to protect individual documents from being deleted or edited from teams, even from team owners? Is there a setting that they can set somewhere in the background to prevent deleting or editing?
So it's an interesting question. The one answer is anything you can think of that you can do in SharePoint when the control is fully rolled out and we have this new files experience in Microsoft Teams. You'll be able to take those same actions. You would probably, for the most part of what you're asking about, you would make that adjustment in SharePoint because that's where you would have access to the settings, the library settings, and you can control what different people can do. Certainly, the difference between owners and members, you have that span of owners might be able to delete, but members cannot. There are higher end levels of ways to protect content like that. If you are a member of the team, or if you're broader, if you're just an admin that's wanting to protect certain zones and adhere to certain best practices when you create what might be a private team and you want them to be productive and doing what they're doing, but if there's a rule that nothing can be deleted, you can leverage some of the technology like legal hold or some of the other components that are part of our e-discovery offering, where you can manage what happens to the content in that particular library. And the same is true for lists. If you want to manage how people can create new, edit, and delete items, knowing full well that if an item is deleted for different ways that you can configure, you can also access that content in the recycle bin. So the recycle bin would be one of the things you would need to go to SharePoint for to navigate through into the recycle bin to recover it. once that asset's recovered, of course, it would show right back up in the document library, and of course, it would show up in the new files experience in Teams as that restoration of file once it appears, which really just takes seconds. So hopefully that answers your question. There's a lot to review in terms of how you can configure the document library settings and manage that, permissions, views, and then of course functionality. But that would all carry over to, once you've made those choices, that they would be adhered to because you're accessing the library in the same way, that it doesn't break any of those rules and doesn't give you any more greater access to it to do things that you don't want.
All right, thank you, Mark, for that. So another question was, when you were showing the SharePoint site, people were asking, you know, if we have these great SharePoint sites, or we think they're great, is there a way to know how many users have followed a site?
That's a good question. You know, a lot of what we do from a metrics perspective is you get to track the activity of the site. So you can run reports from the reporting center that would tell you, you know, how many people have viewed content, how many people have visited the page. If you had any guest users, you could run a specific report to find out what guests actually showed up and then what did they do. When it comes to the following of a site, I'd have to probably ask a member of the SharePoint engineering team. We know we certainly follow that per individual, because when you're on the SharePoint home, you would see a list of all your followed sites. So I know that that information gets logged. I don't know if there is a PowerShell script that you could run to find out all the sites that are followed by a particular person, or the opposite of that, to look up a certain site and see how many people have selected to follow it. I'm going to err on saying yes, but absolutely happy to follow up on that, knowing that it's probably just a way to figure out what is the right PowerShell script to write against the available commandlets to be able to then say, of site X, show me all followed. And again, you can tell I'm not a PowerShell expert, but I believe that is something that would be accessible from an administrator, probably not from a site owner. So yeah, if it's in the graph, like Mike said, then it is something that somebody with elevated permissions to be able to go and get that information would be a SharePoint administrator, a tenant administrator, the more parent level. I don't think that would be somebody who is a site owner would be able to do for their own particular site. I could be wrong on that last part, but I believe it's more of an administrator's activity. But I do believe it's possible. And if what Mike said is true, it's in the graph, then it's just a way to navigate to information and pull it out and make sense of it, possibly through to Excel, or possibly, if it's a big enough report, something you might want to do in Power BI.
All right, Mark, thank you for that. So we'll take that as a follow-up. If we can help in that area, we definitely will. And so final question for right now, I have two people asking similarly. They're talking about the app launcher, Mark, switching from Teams to SharePoint, and that one customer is saying they can see a lot more of their app selection from SharePoint than they can in Teams. And then the other one is saying Teams doesn't show up in my app launcher. How do I go and configure it and make it a similar experience from all the different apps?
Yeah, the first part of that question is, at this point in time, as they're making some changes to the app launcher, there's a unique experience to access and what you see in the app launcher. And even though that sounds like it shouldn't be, there is a reality to it as they're rolling things out. And so you can see here, there is two things that are very different. I only see a limited view of the assets or the apps that I have access to. That doesn't mean that I don't have access to them. And you can see, actually, I still see the old icons. So that's a point in time, and that's something that I know that the App Launcher team is working on to give you a more consistent experience to both your applications and, of course, rolling out the icons and making that a more consistent experience as we roll out those new icons everywhere. You'll see them show up in document libraries for PowerPoint. You would see the new PowerPoint icon next to one of your PowerPoint files. So there's certainly a lot of work still to do there. The other question around not being able to see Microsoft Teams, the obvious first question back would be, do they have access and have they been licensed for Microsoft Teams? And that's a choice that you would make in the Office 365 Admin Center to a particular user and assign them the rights to use Microsoft Teams. It's also something that if they have not been given the rights to create or be a part of Office 365 groups, which is another thing that you can govern and create, so that some people may be able to participate in groups, which is everything I'm showing you here, and some may not. If you haven't been given those capabilities, then you wouldn't see the certain icons that you really don't have access to. And Teams participates in Office 365 groups. So if for whatever reason you have turned off Office 365 groups, or you as an individual or the person that you're asking about hasn't been granted those rights, then they wouldn't see the icon. Excuse me. So moving on just a little bit more about probably 5 to 10 minutes of demo and then just a couple of slides to clean things off. So one thing I want to note, I publish the news, but in this particular channel, I've actually turned on the SharePoint News connector. And when this pops up, you'll see where it says SharePoint News, that it's already configured and it's already active. And what it does is every time somebody publishes news from that connected team site, it'll show up here and start a thread, a conversation thread in Teams. So it's very easy to configure. You would just see it as add. You click add and then configures it. Already it's connected. And as you can see here, that news that I published, Health Science Rocks, started a new thread based on that SharePoint news article. So this is one endpoint now that news is reaching out to help you more broadly distribute and get your news out there. And at the tail end, if we've got time, you'll see that this will also appear in SharePoint Home. And if I were also to show you the SharePoint mobile app, that news would come through there. So I want to show you a couple other things that you've already seen in the context of SharePoint and what do they look like when you bring them into Teams. So this is that home page that we were on for the connected team site. And as it loads up here, you can see that it's kept it pretty intact because I'm on a relatively large screen. I can see it in its full fidelity. But if I was on a smaller device like a tablet or a 4-inch screen, everything reflows and is mobile responsive. And one way to show you that that's kind of fun is if I want to have a conversation around this SharePoint asset, I can bring up the Teams chat and then I can go into a more full view so I can see this in an expanded view. If I wanted to get a little bit better, a better view in what's going on here. But again, I can mention somebody, I can copy paste information in here, and it's a private chat on something, even though this is connected to the team. What I'm going to switch to next will give you a great example of something that isn't a part of that team site. So because I'm now moving to something that's just a part of my overall intranet, this is actually pulling from a communication site that isn't in this scenario owned by this team. So you'll see it comes in a real rich view. And as I navigate and scroll down, you'll see that we're pulling in a lot of different content as a single page, as a single tab in Teams, not multiple tabs, one tab, but with a really nice crafted experience. Again, think of these as mini dashboards, ways to communicate, and they're interactive. So if I want to click through these different assets, this is just an image gallery of 3 images that will show me different assets. As I scroll down, we've got a lot of different content types, including SharePoint spaces that we can bring in, or a 3-dimensional object that I can zoom in and out of. Again, this is just using web parts on a page that are then brought into Teams. And as I scroll back down, you'll see there's even more ways to configure things to look really, really elegant. And of course, you have the ability to have a chat. In this case, this is considered more of a public asset, public, again, within the context of the company. And then I'm having a private chat. So if I wanted to say, something maybe a little silly, but if I wanted to say something that these drones would be great if we used them in Ward 1, I'm having a conversation with my team on a public asset so that this is not a public conversation. And that's a lot of value what the integration between SharePoint and Teams offers. Teams is where you go to chat and share information and collaborate. SharePoint gives you the ability to build out these either very simple news articles or all the way up to be very complex portals like you see here, where I've got access to a ton of information. And again, I can bring in this as a tab in Teams with just 2 clicks. The other thing that we have as a best practice is if you've got a lot of news that your team is sharing, I'm going to close out the conversation over here on the right. This is actually a specific page that you can bring in that has all of the news of the team. So even though these might all come in and start new threads in the conversation tab, I can actually bring this as a full page of all the news. And as I scroll through here, you can see this is news from all the demos that I've been doing. And of course, think of these as news that could have been created while you're on the go. You can create news on your SharePoint mobile app, publish it down into SharePoint, and have it appear here automatically in Teams, either as a new conversation thread or as a part of this all news feed. So this is a pretty important page. And if you're leveraging news, I highly encourage you to add it as a tab in Teams. The last thing here is just another example of what you can do to bring in assets coming from SharePoint. Assets coming from the whole group. And this is me cheating a little bit. I'm getting ready to give a keynote next week. So I'd already created just a simple example of using Planner. But you'll see that I can bring in, similar to how the question was asking around a calendar, the Planner plan, the OneNote, the SharePoint sites, the news, everything that's connected to this group. I can bring in as an experience inside of Teams to any channel that I want as a tab. And not only can I view it, but I can do things that help me navigate and move things around if I wanted to switch this over and make this part of my pre-conference. If it wasn't yet done, I can reactivate the task. I can assign it to new people. But think in terms of what you can do with the technology. Bring it into Microsoft Teams doesn't limit what you can accomplish. Last thing I want to show you is actually how do you bring in this content. I can use 2 tile tabs that are actually connected to SharePoint. One, if I wanted to bring in an entirely new document library, think in terms of maybe a set of PDFs that are important information that you turn to often to look up an asset, to look up maybe terms and conditions, to look up something that's more of a policy of the different hospitals. You could do that, and you could store those in a unique document center, but bring those as a tab for those that need it. In the example that somebody asked about around the question around when a nurse logs in, this might be something that they need to log into and always have with them. So why not add it as a tab in the team where they're very active in throughout the day? The other thing you can do is you can bring in pages. Let's try that again. You can go in and bring in lists, and you can bring in pages. Try it one more time. Hopefully that doesn't fail on us. We'll give this a nice refresh. So instead of F11 full screen, we'll give it a little F5 refresh and give it one more go. So if this fails on me one more time, what I'm really trying to do is showcase how you can bring in full fidelity, similar to how I showed you in Files where you had all the column formatting and all of the access to do what it is you want. This is not going to work for me, so we'll get on this with the team what's going on. But if I had brought in a list, I'd be able to see it in its rich, full fidelity, and be able to navigate views, be able to look up information, be able to search and find and share. And of course, one of the more important parts is to be able to actually have a rich discussion with the team so that I could reference a list, which has never been able to before to have a list and a conversation side by side. And unlucky for me, I was getting ready for this, and I was hoping that I would have an example of a list that I had already added as a tab in Teams, but we'll move on. So think in terms of everything you can add as a tab in Teams and how it flows into SharePoint gives us a rich, deep connection, of course, to how you can think about how these technologies come together to help you be more productive, to create visibility into the content that you're working on, and have it be a rich experience as you would expect if you know SharePoint. If you don't know SharePoint, it's just a great tool to learn on how you can build out these rich experiences to be able to put information in context that includes Power BI dashboards, videos, images or image galleries, or like the question was asking, to be able to bring in the group calendar. Last thing I want to show you here, just because there's a lot beyond SharePoint that you'll learn in the upcoming team session, but just to see it in context here, there's a lot of information you can bring from throughout Office 365, and of course, the connected experience of these different applications for the team. But there's also a lot of third-party apps that you can use to bring in, and these are just as easy to bring in as I was trying to do for SharePoint. But if you just get a quick look of the different connectors that are available, you'll see it's not a small pool, and there's a lot of great, powerful things that you can do to create rich experiences that are then always there for that team in the context of the team. So let me switch out of this. I'm going to go back into my conversation. I'm going to load up the PowerPoint one more time, and then we'll close out this session and make sure we get all questions answered if we can. So a last visual here, if you think in terms of SharePoint and how it supports a number of different scenarios, you've seen a lot in the collaborative space. That's primarily when you look in here on the left side at the top, when you're sharing and working together. But think in terms of SharePoint powering experiences for Microsoft Teams, for Outlook, for OneDrive, and really all applications throughout Office 365 to give you the richest content service that we can, and obviously to make it a consistent experience for when you share and work with files, when you attach content, when you attach and associate things in a conversation. There's a lot of power and value that SharePoint brings, and of course it's directly connected to Microsoft Teams, as hopefully you saw in a lot of what we shared today. A little bit of a roundup of everything we saw. I won't go through everything here, but certainly you should see that we've brought an initial set of capabilities in how we're integrating SharePoint and Teams. There's a lot that we're getting set to announce at the SharePoint conference, which I'll talk about just briefly to give you hopefully a sense of anything that you would find when you come to the SharePoint conference. It's a wonderful place to meet with the SharePoint team. We've got a number of people coming from the Microsoft Teams engineering team as well. But to get a sense of everything that I showed you today is just where these teams are starting to integrate. They've got a lot of great plans that they'll share more about in May. That's May 21st. And think in terms of really working off of everything now is being provided to us as feedback. I'd rather do this. I'd prefer it if it did that. Can it do this? We've been listening, and one of the big things, certainly, I'll just give you a teaser that is already announced on the Microsoft Teams side, is the concepts around private channels. And really pleased to share around the thinking, of course, what happens with all the content in the private channel. So we've got a lot of information to come around that and more in terms of how SharePoint and Microsoft Teams will be further integrated going forward. If you haven't seen what we shared at Ignite, this is really a recap of a number of slides that I combined together that is inclusive of the work that we've been delivering and some soon still to come in terms of that Teams new files experience, the channel awareness, some of what we're doing around the other applications. But take this away as we announced a lot, and about 80% of this has been delivered into production. We've got another set of announcements, like I said, that are coming up at the SharePoint conference, and you would expect to see about this level of information coming around what we're doing for the next 6 months in terms of in development and getting ready to roll out to targeted release. But Mike, if I can eat up a little bit more oxygen, I think we're still decent on time. Maybe a little bit
time, man.
Maybe a little bit over, but I want to make sure that if people are interested to come to learn more, talk to the engineers, talk to us that are helping message and put the word out as far as what's possible, the art of what you can do to be more productive, to work better together. The conference is the SharePoint conference. It's in May. We have 150 speakers across 200 sessions, 20 great in-depth workshops both before and after, and we've got a great expo hall of all the partners, inclusive of the engineering teams from Microsoft, that will be staffing our booths to answer your questions, to show you the latest, greatest of everything that we've got going on. If you like Twitter, follow hashtag SPC19. Go check out what the SPC Conf handle is putting out there. Of course, there's the SharePoint Twitter handle where we're messaging out a lot of the unique sessions and workshops, and there's a lot of great work that Jeff Teeper, our corporate vice president, is getting ready for his keynote to announce a lot of great technology across this and all of the other workloads that SharePoint supports. So we hope that you'll join us in May. There is a virtual component if you want to join us online, but never better to be in person. Registration is open, and if you've got a favorite speaker after review what sessions are available, use their last name as the registration code, and that will save you $50. And if you want, tweet at me. I'll send you a link where I've got all of their names if you want to save a little bit of cost on registration. And with that, a little teaser on some of the things that are connected to what we offer at the SharePoint conference based on our topic today. A lot of great people, a lot of great experts, a lot of great topics, and hopefully to learn more if you want to go deeper or to connect with people that have been doing it. We'll have a lot of customers there. But this is my last slide, Mike. If you want to take over, Shelly, if there's anything to close out housekeeping-wise, we can start on questions. I'll take them as long as people are willing to go, certainly to address the major questions so that we get those before people leave, but also to be mindful of people's time that we are at the top of the hour. But Mike, Shelly, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and Shelly, if you could, real quick, say hello to some of our shout outs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had people from all over the globe join us today. And so we had people from India here. And I'm just scrolling back through. We have Christina here from Christian Care Health System. Robert is joining us from Paris. Thanks, Robert, for joining us. We have Brad from Florida, and let's see, we have a handful of people. We have Marina and Anna from St. Petersburg in Russia. We have Carolina from Poland. Hi, Carolina. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Yeah, it might be a little bit late there. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely. And Mark, you had some really great feedback on your questions. People said thank you for answering them fully. We have Johnny from New York. And so if I've missed anybody, I do apologize. We have lots of activity on the Q&A feed. We tried our best to get to all of them. There were a couple other questions. People are interested to know the new feature that you showed around the integration for the document or the files tab from the document library into SharePoint. Is that already generally available, or when is it? When can we expect to see it?
Yeah, so that should be coming within the next 1 to 2 months. We've had that, on the docket to be rolled out relatively soon. And they're just in the last segments of testing between the SharePoint team and the Microsoft Teams team, knowing that there's both a web component and a desktop component to Microsoft Teams. They're always, with any new addition, big or small, they certainly look at the footprint of the CPU, the footprint of memory, and the overall performance. And so they're in that last mile of fine tuning when they change, which for Teams is a pretty significant change. The control is certainly ready to go. You've seen me demo it. The experience is not only in Teams, it is already rolled out in Outlook. So if you're in Outlook and you're reading your group inbox, click on Files, you would see the new Files experience. Same within OneDrive. We're starting to roll out OneDrive being the view to all of your files. You would see the new Files experience when you click on one of your group names. If I had clicked on that Contoso Europe sourcing, you would have seen that in OneDrive, Outlook, Teams, and of course SharePoint, it's that consistent files experience throughout Office 365. So coming to Teams soon within the next month or two, and you can expect that will be a pervasive experience across all file tabs, which of course, again, is an important default experience in Microsoft Teams. So I know that it sometimes drives people crazy to say it's coming soon, but it really is on its last mile of testing before we release it with confidence.
Well, I know I'm excited for that feature, so I know our customers will be too. And thank you for showing us a sneak peek of that today.
Of course.
So there are two similar questions. They were posted towards the end of your live demo before you got to your slides. So I'm not 100% sure what the context of the question was, but I think it was around when you were showcasing the SharePoint conversation. And so someone was asking, would any of the conversations in SharePoint be stored in the Teams conversation?
So I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. There really isn't a conversation in SharePoint unless they're using, a very, an older classic site that was leveraging the news feed, which would not come through to Microsoft Teams at this point in time. If that's what they're asking, if there was the conversation that was held on an older feature of SharePoint in the classic sense, which we called newsfeed, that does not have any integration with Microsoft Teams. Really, the main points that I showed, it would be SharePoint pages, SharePoint news, SharePoint lists, the home page, and then of course the main document library and how that's connected to Microsoft Teams. That's primarily our integration points. And then when you look at how you go back of what is the Teams experience in SharePoint, we've got the folder badges that tell you it's a part of Teams. And a feature that I didn't talk about today, but I certainly can highlight, is I think I lightly mentioned it. When you have a classic site, if you want to modernize it to bring in all the other applications, inclusive of Teams, we've just started to roll out to targeted release the ability to add a team in one click from the bottom left of a Teams site. So there's that team site experience. Beyond that, there isn't other integrations that we've released to this point. And if they're asking about the older newsfeed feature, hopefully that answered the question.
So someone tried to clarify, they think they meant by the comments at the end of a news article.
So those are actually, sorry, that's a great, I should have thought of that. Yeah, if you have comments turned on a news article or a SharePoint page, those are actually retained in SharePoint. They're actually a part of the page metadata. So it's a unique way that they've associated those comments. Those could be private to the team, or if you're leveraging comments on the internet on like a portal, a communication site, those comments, if you left them on, would be available to the public. They would come with the page. So if you had comments turned on and there were comments on the page and you added that page into Microsoft Teams, they would come into the view of the tab, but it doesn't change how they're stored or where they're stored, which ultimately is SharePoint.
Awesome. And thank you. I think it was Brad for that clarification.
Yeah, that was great clarification.
Okay. And Mike, if you want to help with some of these, because there's a bunch coming in still, and I'm trying to read through them as they're coming in. So
yeah,
there's
this was a further clarification about they use Teams conversations to chat about a document we are working on. So it's kind of like converse. They're seeing how there's conversations in two places. I guess that's part of the point. Let's see.
There's a couple questions around search in Teams, and they I responded that search in Teams will search the documents in the Files tab, and they're asking, will search in Teams ever reach beyond that into other areas of SharePoint?
Yeah, I don't know if that's one that we can fully address here. There's a broader motion and a search team. There's now a more of a unified offering through Microsoft 365 and primarily through Office 365 at this stage. We call it Microsoft Search, which is really at the most parent level. If you think of the top Office 365 navigation bar, where we saw the app launcher, you would also see a new tab to search across all of your assets. That's inclusive of your email, your files, your team chats, your everything, and that's just getting started. It's not in its full plan rollout. But if you think about that, that's one place where you can search from. There's a lot of other entry points to search from. They're going to be based off of the same set of data that you're searching for, but the one difference is the context of where you're starting from. So if I'm in Outlook, I would of course see a lot of email that is going to come through those search results. But we want to unify that so that you're not just seeing email. May wait more to show you email at that point. If I'm doing a search from Planner, of course, I'm going to see results from my Planner plans. And specifically in Teams, a lot of what the search experience is derived from right now is people, chats, and the content. Broader context search beyond right now outside of Teams would need to be performed outside of Teams if you wanted to find other sites, videos, things that aren't a part of that group connected experience for that particular team. You would need to search from a more parent location. And I would let the search team provide a little bit more detail when they announce a few new things at the SharePoint conference. And if you don't go to the conference, that doesn't mean you can't get to the answer. But certainly there's more to come around Microsoft Search with some of the announcements and just the work still to be done to give you a more unified experience when you search from anywhere. But again, we hope that that contextual search, we know who's logged in, not Big Brother we know, but just based on the graph of who you work with and what you work on, and add to that where you're searching from, we hope it's most relevant personalized search you can experience. When you want to break beyond that and go find something that may not be distinctly from that location, you may have to switch context.
All right, so this one's a fairly pointed question. We were talking about deleting files, and if a file was deleted, that you could recover that in the recycling bin. But who would have the authority to empty that recycling bin, and can we limit that? Are there setting choices for emptying the recycling bin?
Yep, there's two stages to the recycling bin. There's the one that everybody can do. So if you delete a file into the recycle bin, everybody has that ability to delete again. There is a second stage repository that is only accessible by site owners, which would be people in the owners group, or a broader context of a SharePoint admin for the whole company. They would be able to go and retrieve the asset from the second recycle bin. But again, that's only accessible to admins.
Awesome. So this is a little bit more of an open-ended question, and I think we could spend all day talking about it, but
Okay.
Could you pick up maybe one or two use cases where you think Teams and SharePoint together resolves a business problem where SharePoint alone is not the best solution?
Yeah,
does that make sense? The question, yeah.
It does, and to be honest, the cheat answer is it would always do that, because you're really, the main thing you're saving somebody from doing is having to switch from app to app, and that's more of just how do you make somebody more productive. So it's not really answering the question. But I'll give you one example that was actually set up for me in Teams. I was signed up to be a speaker, and this is a event about 3 months ago, and I was invited in to be a part of the team. So they shared documents with me. But one of the things that they had set up was, here's where you go to see the schedule of the day. So they had created a SharePoint page and made that as a tab in Teams. And anytime they updated the page, my main access to it was through that tab. But they also had it set up where when I went to register as a speaker, they had a specific login or a specific page dedicated to speakers that I actually went through and gave my credentials, entered in my bio, and arranged for my hotel based on that page that they had brought in that actually wasn't a SharePoint scenario, but it was a page that they brought in to the Teams experience. And so the solution that was built was I could see everything I needed to do for that event. I could ask questions in the chat. I could see the documents when I was done with my presentation. They asked that I uploaded it to the document library. They called the folder and the channel presentations. And then within that, I was able to switch context to see when my session was scheduled. Of course, if it got rescheduled or if I needed to reschedule it, I could do that. That particular page was built on SharePoint just for the speakers. And then there was the external site that had some smart logic that knew who I was. And when I clicked from tab to tab, I was already signed into the site as me, because that's the way I was invited into that particular team. And then I registered, got my hotel, and I did all of that without switching to multiple browsers. And certainly that was the one scenario that first came to mind. The other one is actually based on some new technology that we're doing, and whether I answer the question with SharePoint or not. but I'll answer it in the way that I think is unique. A lot of people ask us the difference between Microsoft Teams and Yammer, and a lot of the ways that you use and configure Teams is to work with your team on that day-to-day inner loop, and you leverage Yammer when you go to more broadly engage and communicate. But think about the scenario that you want the team that's working on answering and engaging in the broader context is going to still be just a team of 5 to 10 people that may every once in a while have a question among themselves to say, oh, we got a kind of a tough question today on our Yammer feed. How do we answer that? And they work together in the conversation tab to come up with what might be the answer. And now with the Yammer web part being able to be brought in as a tab in Teams, they can actually see their group Yammer discussion, which is more public beyond the team members. They've come up with what they want to finally write as their answer or the document or link they want to share, and they switch over to that second tab without having to go out to the Yammer web experience, which I don't mean as a bad thing. I just mean as it saves me time. And right there, we come up with our decision and then we post it publicly. And I literally just switch tabs. And if you think about that, you would then, in that same context, you might have a FAQ that's been set as a SharePoint list. So a scenario there would be if there's already a question that's been answered, let's put it into the FAQ list. Here's your question, here's your answer, and have that actually be a real SharePoint list. Anytime somebody adds to that FAQ, it's searchable, I can find it, I can turn to it from one tab, I can see the list, and then to the other tab, I could post public again within the company to that Yammer group. So you're right, it is a long conversation, and in the healthcare space, I'm sure Mike's got some ideas there. I know that it's endless. You know, if you think about any page that you can create, again, I kind of keep saying these mini dashboards.
Yep.
A lot of what we got as feedback just from the technology is to be able to build a mini dashboard means I don't have to have 5 tabs to tab between all the information. I actually put it into context in a thoughtful way that renders beautifully because it's a SharePoint page that looks great in Microsoft Teams. But the solution is, what do you put on that page? Do I put a list web part that's connected to a video that somebody watches and then connects to a form that they submit? Absolutely, you could do that.
Yeah, and Mark, I think you brought up a great point. I think, you know, a lot of folks I've heard they kind of get the heebie-jeebies when as they're starting to implement Teams. They're like, this is something totally new, but I have all this skill sets in SharePoint. And the fact is, because we support those native pages and all that all the stuff that you're doing, developing, it's all still, it's perfectly applicable because it all pulls in. And in fact, then you can start to centralize some of those different views and applications and different things so people can reuse them across teams and not be recreating the wheel.
Yeah, and that's about the biggest benefit of how everything is integrated. If you think about SharePoint, you know, where your content is stored, you're just getting a window into it. A lot of what we've been talking about today is through Teams, but getting back to the example of if I attach a document to an email, you hope that that's just the document from the document library. You're giving permissions via the email for that person to be able to view it. But when they click on it, it can go into a browser view, or it can go into, if they want to use the rich client. But the value is single source of truth. The document is not a version of, the pages are not a version of, the list is not a second instance of. And that's true for all of the ways that we connect to lots of different third-party sources. If you have something that's in Jira, if you've got something that's in Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is that makes sense to pull in as information to reference from tab to tab or reference within the conversation, you can do that, but the source maintains the same so that the data resiliency certainly is intact. The permissions as you set them or as they change, of course, remain intact no matter where they appear, because you're changing at the source level and just getting a window into it. And a lot of what we tried to emphasize today is it's just not a lightweight window into it. It's the full experience of what you have the permissions and access to do.
Yeah, that's an awesome use case there, Mark. And I think a few of you have asked some more specific questions around Teams in healthcare and what are those use cases. And so Mike has posted that we have a Teams week coming up at the first week of April, I believe. And so there are 3 days in that week that is specific for use cases for healthcare. And so we do highly encourage you guys to join that week like you have today. And so I promise to ask at least one more question because it has been posted here a few times. And so for those, I do see people that are dropping off. For those of you who do need to go, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully this was valuable to you. So we do ask that you follow our blog here at aka.ms/HLS-blog. And if you have any more comments or questions, we can engage with you there. And my error here, we do have a session coming up tomorrow, same time, same place. And so we hope to see you there. In the meantime, while we are completing up the session today, please feel free. We'll stay here as long as you guys have questions. So Mark, the question that I promised is Jeff asked from Newark. They're having challenges around PDF or MSGs, viewing them in Teams. Are these loaded? Do we have any kind of viewers that they can add? Are these loaded by Microsoft, or do we need to load them locally by our admins for viewing PDF or MSG files?
Yeah, I'm surprised that you have problems with PDF files, knowing that certainly if you were to add a PDF as a tab of itself, you would just go in and pick that by choosing it from the file viewer. So we can certainly look further into that. Reviewing messages, I don't think that is a file type per se that is supported from a view perspective in Microsoft Teams. Certainly, if I had a .msg file stored in a document library, I do believe that we have a viewer for it. But I'm not 100% sure what that experience would be in Teams. So it's something that I'd have to review a little bit further. I don't know off the top of my head. I know that if you type in any search engine, if you type in OneDrive file viewers, you'll see a pretty exhaustive list of all the file types that we do view. And the reason I point you to that website is when you review that list of the file viewers that we have, that we support, that you get sort of for free out of the box, means you can see those files rendered just the thumbnail, or if you were to see it like I was showing you in the more rich detail when you click on the file, to get a preview before you actually open it in the application that it's required to actually work with it. It's a pretty long list, and it means it's good for OneDrive, SharePoint, Outlook, and Teams at this point. Once we're fully rolled out with the new files experience, it brings that file previewer experience along with it. So I'd have to look to see what the case is with .msg, but a .pdf I would think that we would be okay on, but certainly happy to follow up on that. And I just have to admit it, in terms of time on my end, I'm happy to take questions offline. If there's any resource that you want to generate off of Q&A, I can certainly help with that. I need to run, Mike and Shelly, and I just want to give a shout out to everybody, not only that stayed this long, but if you joined us today or watching this on a recording, thank you for your interest in what we're doing. We always, always, always are open for feedback, whether that's in person at an event. If you want to send me an email, you can tweet at me, bug Mike, and he'll forward it to me, whatever the case is. We're here to unblock you with questions. We would love for you to take more and more and more advantage of the technology that you most likely already have, or if you're looking to come on board and join us in Office 365, we've got a lot of ways to convince you, and we're very competitive in what we offer. We're very industry leading and, of course, forward thinking in what we're doing next. And we hope that you get a sense of that, or at least try it yourself and give us some feedback what you like and what you'd like next. But thank you for your time. Thanks, Mike and Shelly, for the opportunity to come. And I can see who you're teeing up for the next one, which is my friend Bill Bear. So Say hi to Bill when you see him.
Thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate it.
Definitely.
And Shelly, did you want to close, I guess, just talk about Bill for tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who are still hanging on with us, we thank you so much. I think the top line, we had about 135 attendees, and we still have 84 of you hanging on. So thank you so much for your participation today. And so tomorrow we are going to be talking about intelligent discovery and mixed reality in SharePoint with Bill Baer. He's a senior program manager. And so for those of you that had the questions around search, definitely around intelligent discovery will be great conversation. And then mixed reality and SharePoint will be a great talking point, especially in healthcare. We have some forward-thinking engineers in this area, and happy to engage with you guys on your questions. So with that, we are right at the end of our session today. Thank you guys all for your time. And again, if you guys have any additional questions, please reach out and we'll be happy to either answer them ourselves or get you in touch with the right person. Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.